Now, last time we talked about how philosophy seems to be fundamentally linked with language, that to do philosophy is to attempt to provide answers or talk about fundamental questions about what it means to exist, or whether God exists, or what is the highest good. But someone could say that this presupposes that the answers to those questions are embedded in language, that only through the use of language will we have any chance at attempting to answer the question. And thus, by saying this, we can really only say that philosophy can only be done through language, but perhaps this is a prejudice in philosophy itself. For example, when we talk about aesthetics, like the colors that we see, what it means, that when you look at something that's beautiful, that you get a sensation. Aesthetics seems to be the reduction of that feeling into language to try to convey that, but perhaps that reduction to language itself doesn't really fully represent what it means to perceive something. In this way, by doing philosophy and reducing phenomenon to language, we're actually simplifying the world. We're making it more simple than it actually is. Now, let's say that we agree that language simplifies the world into words. Is there an alternative way that we can communicate without language and still kind of do philosophy? Again, philosophy is kind of the attempt at addressing questions or meaning in the world. But the tradition, this has been done with language because language seems to be the most efficient way to communicate ideas and concepts between people. Now, one alternative way of going about philosophy and not necessarily using language reminds me of, again, something that Martin Heidegger said. He was, I think, offered a teaching position. I forget at which school, but it was away from his hometown where his community was, and he was in this dilemma of whether to accept the position or not. And he went to one of the common folk there, someone he knew, and he asked them whether he should take the position or not. And the man simply just looked at him. And Martin Heidegger interpreted, or was able to take in just from that look, with no language whatsoever, what the decision ought to be. Thus, it was through the presence and the gestures and the mannerisms and the way of looking and the history between the two people that provided the basis for coming to a reconciliation with the dilemma. One of the ideas that Martin Heidegger puts forth about just understanding or becoming familiar with the world is a concept he calls letting things be. That when things, I guess, show up for us, we can either kind of mold it into our understanding of the world, maybe through language, kind of whether that's maybe, if we go back to Hannah Arendt's concept of the world, we reduce things to their usefulness, or in the life world, where everything is kind of a function of life's productivity or building ourselves kind of growth, we reduce things towards how well it achieves that. I'd say this concept of letting things be is actually most connected with the third condition that Hannah Arendt says, the action, where humans or people aren't reduced to any single usefulness or productivity, but they're kind of spontaneous, unpredictable action. And letting that be, letting that kind of fold and bloom into the world is kind of I don't want to say the purpose, but the value of action and the vita activa, which he says. And with this letting be, has no kind of agency. We don't act on it to let it be, but we let it come to us. It's more listening than talking. This kind of goes back also to one of the first videos where we were talking about sensibilities, where sensibilities aren't skills, where skills are kind of actively employed by an agent, but listened and being able to tune yourself into the world to be able to react to it in certain ways. So if we think about it in this way, philosophy might not be so attached to language as it might seem. Philosophy could also be about letting things be, or listening, or tuning yourself into the world or circumstances that you're in, whether that be with people or the work, the human artifice, or life itself. Once you're able to listen to something for a while, you become familiar with it, and the more you become familiar with it, the more you can actually start to maybe use words to capture it. Again, words are never going to completely capture something because they themselves are simplistic forms of what it's trying to interpret, but you become closer to it. If you never listen, and you simply use your words, you're always going to use kind of some static belief system to control the things in the world to conform to the way you want them to be, versus letting them show you what they are.